You're listening to the Primarily Hooves Podcast, where we make learning accessible from the ground up. We're back. Hi there. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Lauren.
And we are Primarily Hooves. And this is the Primarily Hooves Podcast. Welcome to episode 2. We are so excited to be back. Episode 1 was so much fun.
Oh, it was.
If you haven't watched it, you probably want to, because in episode 1, we discussed the origin of who we are and what we do, because I'll assume most of you probably don't know us. A quick little Cliff Note version for those of you who are too busy to watch episode 1, even though I think that's silly, is that we are barefoot trimmers with a very special interest in whole horse health and what makes a healthy hoof. We love the hoof and we love how it works and we love learning and exploring and teaching on the function of the hoof. But what's really important is what makes that hoof healthy. We have a belief that the horse's hoof is the check engine light of the horse and that it'll tell you a lot of things about the horse's health. And so in order to have a healthy hoof, you have to have a healthy horse. We have a combined 40 years experience working on horses' health, and all things horse care related. And so that's who we are in the really quick version, but go watch episode 1 or listen to it, depending on how you're consuming this content. And let's get into it. So in episode 1, we talked about the origin of how you got this started, this whole Primarily Hooves thing. And in that, we discussed the first couple horses that made a big impact on, well, really, if we're going to be very frank, forced you into the learning journey.
Exactly.
Because it's not necessarily something you had set out to do.
No.
And we explored that quite deeply as far as how you evolved into barefoot hoof trimming.
That's correct.
Now, at the end of episode 1, and you had already mentioned him a few times in the episode, but we didn't really get to expand on it, but you had a lipizoner.
That's right.
And at the end of episode 1, we started talking a little bit about the whole other side of what made the evolution into thinking about the whole horse. And that was the lipizoner, and that was through his metabolic conditions, and that was through diet. And so today, I think for episode 2, it would be a lot of fun to talk about that journey, because the nutritional aspect, that is almost more important, because that's what makes the healthy hoof. You can do all the trimming in the world, learn from whatever guru, but if you don't have the body healthy, you're not going to get anywhere with the hooves. And granted, nutrition is one aspect of it, but I think it'd be a great topic for today.
Fantastic. So, like we said, I purchased my lipizoner 30 years ago. I think I had Fogel for 2 or 3 years before I went and purchased. His name is Dick Sander. He is a lipizoner Swedish warm blood cross out of the stallion Pluto to Dixana, and Brasandra was the mare. And so starting trimming Fogel, and Fogel also came on a certain feed when I bought him that I was not supposed to change. So I didn't. But as we worked through the barefoot trimming to see, and the different cases that I was seeing, started running into some metabolic issues with horses. And even though living in Florida, which is quite different than living in Tennessee here, the grass is mostly a low sugar grass, which was very good. And we basically went with big brands, big company brands. So
big
Purina,
trusted brands.
Right. Big trusted brands. Purina or Nutrina, feeding a senior feed to Fogel. So when the lipizoner was born, I had talked to my vet about what he thought might be the best food for him. And a ManaPro product was suggested, which was an extruded feed, and it was very easy to chew and digestible. And
what does extruded mean?
You know, I wish I kind of knew more. What I gathered from it was that the food was very easy to get the nutrients out of. So it was ground up into nothing and pelletized to a certain extent. It was more like balls instead of your regular pellet. Okay. And the nutrients were supposed to be very easy for the horse to digest.
Okay.
And so I started with that. I was not an ingredient tag reader at the time. And so I pumped this horse full of this product. And in our journey together, he was, and Lipizans are big, round, robust looking horses, but my horse was fat. And he had a very thick crested neck, which everybody said, look how beautiful he is. As he grew and as it was time to start with his training, with his riding training, because, if he could lead and pick up his feet, sort of, that was all the training that I knew to do in the beginning. And so then, we went right into trying to ride. And he was not a happy camper. Mm-hmm. He would display behavior that would show you that he was not into it. And so if I looked at Fogel's hooves, we'll go back to hooves for a second, that were very contracted and they were very deep, very concave. But the Lipizan or Dick's had a very flat foot, overly flat foot. And so I just thought, well, that's the difference between them, whatever. But later I found out that that was a laminitic foot. Now, he didn't have outrageously high heels, so he never tipped into a rotation, but he did sink. So if you looked at his coronary band, as opposed to Fogel, who had a very gentle slope from back to front, Dix's coronary band actually bowed down. So that kind of tells you that if they go from here to then here, that the bones in the capsule were dropping. And that was from the inflammation in the lamina. So the lamina wasn't holding. I didn't know that much. I mean, I knew about the frog. I knew that that was a supportive system that needed to be thick, but it was not like our frogs are not the same as they were back in the day.
And so this would have been after you started doing a little bit of hooves. You were trimming your own horses. Okay, you hadn't changed the diet yet. You hadn't thought about diet when you had started the trimming process. Trimming came first.
Right. Dick's was started before I did the barefoot, maybe a year or two.
Okay.
So he had traditional farrier. He had shoes because he had these flat feet. We want to lift that foot off the ground. We don't want that foot touching the ground. But he still wasn't a happy guy. And very poor attitude towards work. He was a non-forward horse. People will talk about that. Oh, my horse won't go forward. And that was Dick's through and through. He would rather stand still than move. And so what do people tell you? Oh, he's lazy. And he's not a lazy guy. You watch him run in the field and boss everybody around. He's not a lazy guy.
I think very poor attitude. The words you used was definitely putting it very nicely.
Yes. Very poor attitude.
AKA, he could be pretty dangerous.
He could be pretty dangerous, yes. And as a matter of fact, and this was before I started trimming him, the farrier had come and I had made the decision to sell him. Because I just did not need a horse like that in my life because he wasn't doing what I wanted to do.
Well, it goes a little further than that. I think it's worth stopping for just a second to talk about that, in that it's one thing to deal with a horse who's a little bit rogue when you really have nobody else depending on you. But you had at least one kid, me at that point.
Right.
And some of the things he did were really pretty dangerous.
Yes.
And so you didn't understand why, you just knew he was dangerous.
Right.
And you couldn't really risk him doing something and getting you dead. And then, I think that as much as kind of going, okay, I have to sell him is one thing, there was a good reason behind it.
Oh, yes. And I sent him to trainers.
Yeah.
I did, again, at the time, what I knew to do to help him. And it was a dangerous situation. And having a very young child, it changes your priorities.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that you're around to raise them.
Yep.
So it was just something that, came to the decision on. So I had the farrier come to put shoes on. We're going to try to put together a little video of him, to sell him. And again, it wasn't like today. We're using the big VHS cameras to take video. In the shoeing process, he had shoes that had clips. In that process, he stepped down on the clip. And the farrier was like, oh, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. And he was lame for 4 or 5 months. It was absolutely insane how long he was lame for. And I have a feeling because of how flat his feet were, stepping into that clip, and clips are not huge, but because his sole depth was so thin, because his foot had sunk and was so flat, we could have had issue with the coffin bone at that point.
Yeah.
And so it was soaking and soaking and soaking for so many, many months. And in that time of soaking, his and mine relationship changed just a bit. I guess he knew the concern for him that I had. He participated in all of that like a champ. I mean, it was really incredible, but I think my attitude towards him was a little bit different during that. I wasn't just saying, oh, he's this stupid horse that won't do anything for me. So there was a little bit of an awareness there that I wanted to do more to find out what I could do to help him. And that's a whole nother story with training that hopefully we'll get
That'll
to.
make another good episode.
Another good episode. But diet-wise, we started, and I think it was several factors were involved. So it was Fogel, who was on the senior feed that you just did because you did. Dick's on and now I find out it was a soy-based food. There were 3 different kind of soy products in there, and soy can be very inflammatory to some horses. Then we had our German Shepherd, who started having seizures. And my veterinarian lived next door, Hal Gumbiner. And when I talked to him about it, because a seizure is really a pretty scary thing to witness.
Yes.
And in your dog, and you don't know what to do. And it lasted 3 or 4 minutes. And so like immediately I went over to Hal and I said, oh my gosh, Ginger just had a seizure. And he said, oh, well, that's kind of common in German Shepherds. And I said, okay, but like, what can we do for it? And he said, well, we'll have to wait till she's got, she has like, I don't know, 3 or 4 a month until we can put her on phenobarbital or something like that. And I thought, I don't want to watch that and I don't want her going through that 3 or 4 times.
Well, and it's scary, especially with small children, because they're just
flailing around.
And I remember being on the bed, and she was up on the bed, and she went into one, and that was terrifying.
Very scary. And so in that process, a friend of mine had mentioned for the dogs a raw diet. A raw diet. I was like, wow, that's really kind of interesting. And so again, more research, finding out the nutritional needs of the dog and doing that through real food instead of through the dog food. And so in that process, boy, that gets you thinking, because the things that they throw in dog food, some brands of dog food.
Right.
Yeah, not all brands, but some brands. And back in the day, probably could have been a lot of brands. It was some gross stuff. I mean, it was some really, really, you wouldn't feed, you wouldn't feed anybody that.
Well, and especially not as the bulk of their diet.
Oh, that's get a scoop, throw it in. That's all they're eating. Right. So that was not right. With Dick's and the appearance of his hooves, as I learned through the barefoot trimming process, that he didn't have the concavity. And that's not something that you carve into a foot. And so through some of that research, and with the way his body looked, with the enormous crest, with the fat pads all over his body, with the temperament, he would go from just lethargic and sluggish to explosive. And so doing more research and learning about it, I was convinced that he had something called EMS, which is equine metabolic syndrome.
And back then, was it, I feel like, and I could be wrong, EMS, I feel like, is a newer term. They were calling it insulin resistance back then.
That's correct.
Same thing.
Same thing. Insulin resistance. The insulin doesn't come out to, work on the sugars and.
Right. They're not sensitive to that.
Right. Not sensitive. So in that process, not only, like with the dog food and looking at labels and seeing the things that are put in there, I started researching the horse feeds and what comprised the equine, the American equine diet. And some of the stuff I found was absolutely atrocious. What are some of the plant byproducts and forage byproducts. And so like oats, that's something you can see and feel and you know what it is. But I remember we had a Purina plant not far from us. There was one in the next town. And when I had gotten Fogel's senior feed, now this is a senior feed. That means the horse doesn't have good teeth to chew the feed, right? And so there were whole pieces of corn in that senior feed. I thought, well, this isn't good.
And there usually wasn't, right? That was
there
atypical.
usually wasn't. Every bag I'd gotten was fine, and I get this bag, and then so I didn't want to feed that, and I opened the next bag. Well, we always had feed on hand. Well, that bag also had corn in it, and I thought, well, this doesn't seem right to me. So I called the local plant. And I talked to the gentleman and I said, listen, I have the senior feed because I have an older horse who needs it. So he said to me, well, we make one batch of something and then we throw the next batch in and it's probably pieces and parts from the previous batch. So I said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Because I said there's not supposed to be any corn in this. That's what the ingredient tag said. And so then he proceeded to let me know that what was in the bag wasn't necessarily what was on the label. And I said, excuse me? And he said, well, we go by commodities. So whatever is the cheapest commodity that's going to get the numbers that you see on the side.
Nutritional analysis.
Right, which is your protein numbers and, all of those numbers. When you ask people, I feed a 14%. I feed an 18% protein. And people talk about the protein percentage. But see, I've learned what are they making that protein up with?
Right.
That's the important part. So
he lost a customer that day, but what a wonderful thing that he was honest about. That's really special because now, especially now, it seems they can be so vague. Purina, for one.
Yes.
At least from my experience, they're not even listing their ingredients. And in order to find them on the internet, it's like really difficult.
Right. Well, and then so I'm thinking, okay, we've got to find a better product, find a better product. And so then I did find one online and I thought, oh, this sounded great because they said it was oats and it seemed like a very good product. Yes, it was pelletized, but it seemed like an excellent product. And so there was not a dealer of this feed for 2.5 hours, right? So that's a 5-hour round trip. And remember, I've got young kids and a farm. And so one of my husband's employees was going in that direction for work because he owned an air conditioning company in Tampa and he was going further south. I don't know if it was Seminole. I can't remember what the exact area that this store was in. But anyway, he went, I said, get me like 5 bags because this sounds great. That'll take a while to get through. And so he brings me the product and on the internet, the products look great, the ingredient. On the tag of the bag, there was different. There was animal protein in this feed. And I was like, what? I remember calling up and saying, I really researched this product. I thought this was going to be something that I wanted to use, but I'm like really disappointed. So what she said was that those were old bags. And what was in the bag wasn't necessarily what you saw as the label on the bag. At that point, I just said, no, because now I've heard this twice.
I have more respect for them if they crossed it out and wrote it on with a Sharpie,
Right. And so that had given me very, very little respect for some of these big companies that, you were just buying the feed and it didn't really matter, but it does matter.
It does matter.
That's the problem. It really does matter. And I even know from human nutrition, back in the day when I was doing the bodybuilding.
That could be a whole nother episode when we want to totally fall off, derail from the whole horse thing.
Right. But back then, you had to eat very clean. So there was no processed foods. You knew how much protein you were taking in. So I knew something about nutrition, in other words. And I started feeling as strongly about the animals, seeing the difference in the German Shepherd. Once she was on the raw diet, she didn't have any more seizures. There was no medication. She never got to several seizures a month. And basically with the raw diet, it just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
In my search, and there's another one, because, okay, I have a family, right? I have the farm, I have small children, and in my quest to have healthy animals, I'm purchasing and pre-bagging dog food, raw dog food. So that means chicken breasts and all this stuff that you have to prepare, put in small baggies, throw in the freezer.
Well, and it wasn't just that, because we had a golden retriever who wasn't really sure if he liked the raw food.
Right.
And so there was also that like lightly cooking it to his palate
Right,
and, you know.
Right. So then we have the horses. I think, I can't even remember what the base feed was for the horses, to tell you the truth. But I know from my research and discovering Dr. Eleanor Kellon that their minerals needed to be balanced. And so you needed your pasture tested, your hay tested, the base feed you were going to use, and then you balanced your feed to that information. There were many, many a days that I would be, at the kitchen counter, instead of cooking my wonderful family dinner, I was with my gram scale, putting a touch of zinc in. So that was very, very time consuming. In that process, I kind of figured out you can only do so much. You have to fight the battles you can and be willing to slide on certain things. So I decided that I would find a good vitamin mineral supplement that we could add to the food instead of doing the balancing. And that was after a couple years. I mean, I did do that for several years.
Well, and through that, you really get to have that hands-on learning. And I think that's so important.
Yes,
the
hands-on learning is extremely important. So going back to the period of time where Dix had his abscess from stepping on the clip of the shoe, I was doing a lot of research, and I did find out that I was the cause of a lot of the problems that he was having. So that always makes you feel good. In the end, I decided to keep him, because if I could help him through these things, there could be a pretty nice horse in there. And there is.
I remember being a kid. I don't know if it was while he was lame or right before, you went with Wendy and you went to look at a different horse that you were going to buy to replace Dix. And if I remember right, it was a Palomino.
Yes.
And that has
down the
been she had wanted a Palomino her entire life because of Mr. Ed. She finally got her Palomino, which will make another great episode.
Right.
We were so excited. But you went out to look at him, and he was lame too.
He was lame too, yeah.
So there are so many things here that as much as, and from the get-go with Fogel, as much as it'd be so nice to take the easy way out, life said no.
Right.
And so then stepping into this aspect, the nutritional, the metabolic aspect, as much as you wanted to take the easy way out, life said no.
Right.
I just think that's so fascinating.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, life definitely said no. And during this time, not a whole lot of people were exploring these things. And so I was really the outsider. Nobody wanted to listen to the crazy lady.
We still complain to this day that this information isn't more mainstream.
Right.
And yet, and horse owners have trouble accessing this information or finding it, because if you look something up on Google, this alternative way is not the first thing that pops up.
That's right.
And yet, we take for granted how much easier we have it today than you had it 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
30 years ago.
Absolutely.
We can have a podcast about it now, you know?
That's right. That's right. So as Dix healed and I started finding out that the grass was part of his problem, we had two ways to deal with that. And one was keeping him off the grass, and the other one was using a grazing muzzle. And back then, grazing muzzles were not that good. I did a lot of putting him in the sand arena by himself so he could move around with some hay. And I remember the first day I put, the kind of, what is that, like a bowl kind of muzzle on him, right? Just a round circle with a plate on the bottom. And I thought, is this going to be great? He's going to love this. He's going to go out, be in the grass, explore. And so, I had the muzzle on and I put him out. And I mean, he looked at me like, aren't you taking this thing off? And I was like, nope.
Go have fun.
So in Florida, the ground is very sandy. Even the pasture is very sandy. And horses, at least my horses, kind of make roll holes in each of the pastures, which is a roll hole is an area that they waller around in and gets to be just a sand pit. And you just
they make their own sandbox.
They make their own sandbox. And so he walked over to that little roll hole and he got himself down and laid down and started groaning. And I thought, what is that? Right. And so I had already kind of gone back in and I see him down there and he's just laying there. And with each breath, he's going, oh.
He always erred to the dramatic.
And so, I'm like, get up, like walk around, because that was the other thing. When you're overweight, it would be nice to move around and not eat. Instead of just shuffling around and eating, it would be nice if he kind of, ran around or explored or did something. No. He just laid there and moaned. And so I was like, this is really not going to be the solution. And there were other times I had him out in the muzzle just to give it a check. And he would hook that thing under the gate and rip it off his nose, took a couple gates with him. And so the muzzle was not working out.
I remember you tried things like putting a little piece of carrot, which would have been a super high value treat for him because he was sugar sensitive. He's not allowed to have those things in the muzzle to try to associate it with good. This is another place in grazing muzzles. This is another place where we take for granted how lucky we are today, because back then, you had one style. It was the basket style muzzle. It didn't fit good. It was hot, but it could save a life if the horse would use it. Whereas now we've got companies like Green Guard Equine making an incredible muzzle that is so much more biomechanically appropriate. And the horses
another
enjoy.
Podcast.
Yeah, another podcast. Yes.
Maybe we can get somebody from
now. If back then something like that existed, the muzzle may have been successful.
Exactly.
It's amazing. So, we are so lucky.
And
you're so lucky, Sadie.
You're very lucky, Sadie.
I should probably say real quick for our audio listeners, we have our podcast out in our mini horse barn. And so sometimes you might hear some noise or us talking, and it's because we have visitors. And that's why you should probably also check us out on YouTube if you want to see how cute these little devils are. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought they have no idea.
That's right. We have our mini winnies. So it worked out better for him to be in the arena area that was fenced off. And so it was just a big sandbox and, to sprinkle out some hay. But that's another thing I learned. People will feed hay in one space. What do? You just throw out a lump of hay and the horse stands there all day and eats. And that's where I learned, well, maybe if we took and we put some here and some here, it would be more like a grazing situation, that they would move a little bit, pick a little here, pick out all the good grass and then kind of make their rounds.
Did slow feed hay nets, were they a thing?
Slow feed hay nets were not a thing back then. Yeah, I know. We had nothing.
You had nothing?
We had nothing.
Holy moly. It was like you were just trying to build it all with sticks and rocks. And they obviously did not have breakaway grazing muzzles if he took a gate or two with him.
Yeah, he took a gate or two with him.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that was... I know that it was back in the dark ages.
Yes.
So slowly, Dix is getting better now. His foot is getting better. We can do maybe a little bit of exercise with him. And so he did slim down. He started looking much better, feeling much better. The relationship on the ground got immensely better, but the relationship in the saddle did not, because I did not know.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know. I was not clear enough. I did do a stint with clicker training. And so that was very important to understand how to break down what you were trying to teach. But the evolution for Dix and I was really with Harry Whitney. Another episode.
Because
of
Maybe
way
even a special guest. Oh, that'd be so cool.
Well, it might be in the works. But because the clicker training, again, on a horse who is so motivated by food, that's the only thing he would think about was the food. It's kind of like holding a drink up to an alcoholic. They'll do anything for it. And so is that real training? Is that getting the horse to really think about and participate in a way of freedom? Right? It was another bond. It was holding him back. And it was, again, making him do it because he had no choice.
And that's really common. In horses, it can be common, but that's extremely common in insulin-resistant horses because due to the instability of their blood sugar, they are hungry.
That's right.
They're hungrier than the average horse. And hungry as a horse exists for a reason.
That's right.
But when it comes to these insulin-resistant or metabolic horses, it's to a whole nother level.
It's to a whole
And I remember, how do I say it so it's podcast friendly? I remember how excited he could get over food.
Oh, very excited. Yeah.
Not just emotionally excited, physically excited over food. And that was
scary.
Weird.
Yeah.
Scary is a good
weird.
word for it. Yeah.
He doesn't do that anymore.
No.
So another symptom in Florida was the fact that Dix had stopped sweating. And when it's 101 degrees and 300% humidity, that's not a good thing. My husband, of course, who is in the air conditioning business, built him in his stall a cold room. We had an air conditioner dedicated to him. He had those strips. Well, we had stalls that went out to little runs so that the horse wasn't just confined to stall. Out his back door, we had those strips that would, like you see at the grocery when they go back to the freezer. You could stick your head out, his body could be in, but his head could be out, which was really kind of cute. I think we put plexiglass along the front so he could see out, but we could keep the cool in. Insulated the roof. I mean, it was a production. It was
awesome.
Yeah.
It was friggin'
It was a
awesome.
Nice place to go visit when it was hot outside.
You trimmed hooves in there.
Right.
You would body clip in there. It was awesome.
It was a nice little room. So
expensive though.
It was very expensive. So these are the things. I had also had him tested for Cushing's, and that's when we found out about the insulin resistance. But the numbers weren't quite right for Cushing's. Well, now we know all horses are different and they're not going to be coming in at this magic number, right? There is a range. What I probably should have done, and we suggest this to clients now, is to test your horse at the same time of year for several years, right? And that way you might still be in range, but if the numbers are going up and the physical symptoms are there, it's probably a good idea to treat these things.
Well, because most people, if they have a horse they kind of suspect, they'll test him once, and when it comes back within the normal range, then that thought is gone out of their mind until something big happens.
Right.
Whereas if you suspect and you test, and the next year you test, and it's a little bit higher, maybe that next year they may still be normal, but you start thinking about putting things into practice, and by the third year, if it's higher, even still in normal range, but by that third year, the fourth year, they're going to be high and they're going to be Cushing's. But it was starting 4 years ago.
Years ago.
So many people take that negative test when they see symptoms and just go,
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
And they don't want to think about it. That's right. And so I knew there was, I think it was either T3 or T4. I can't remember. One of those numbers was pretty wacky, but the ACTH was fine. Whatever that means. But I started looking into some herbal remedies. Horses are herbivores. That's what they are. That's what they eat. They'll pick on a certain weed for whatever reason. Oh, somebody's stretching. Yes. Oh, that was lovely. They'll pick on different weeds so that they get a variety. And what do we do in our pastures? It's a monoculture, right? You know, we had Bahia grass. We wanted to kill everything else off. You need your pastures to look good and they need to look pristine, you know.
We're killing the bees and we're killing the horses too.
We're killing the bees and we're killing the horses. So I discovered a herbal remedy to help support him with the Cushing's. And I think it did a very good job. You know, it was very effective for what it was. And so that was in Florida. But we decided to buy a farm in Tennessee, thinking my husband would be cooler in the air conditioning business, that I would be cooler with the trimming business, that Dick's may not need an air conditioned room for him.
Well, and you could do the intensive rehabs here.
That's right. And the fact that we could do some intensive stuff here, which I knew would be years down the road because this was just a bare piece of property. And so we had other priorities before the rehab. But once I moved here, everybody was just kind of out. And I remember making him just a little tiny area that he could live in. And he ate that down in 3 days. And the herd was elsewhere. He was by himself. He had always been by himself because he was the only one restricted from grass at the time. It was like he was the problem. Well, moving to Tennessee.
Back in the day, he was pretty mean.
Yes, back in the day, it was extremely
When he didn't
mean.
feel good, he was mean to those other horses.
Right. Yeah, he really was. But we were busy fencing. I mean, this was 66 acres. That was it. This was not a farm that was set up with paddocks and pastures and whatever. It had perimeter fencing, but sort of. You know, kind of rusted barbed wire. But I will never forget the day we had the herd, which was probably 7 of them. I think we brought 8 to Tennessee. So 7 of them were together in the kind of back pasture. And Dick's was in the front in this little round thing that I had to drag water to. And I mean, it was just awful. And we basically, I don't know, I guess it was Doug and I looked at each other and said, you know, sink or swim, because we can't keep doing this. And so we turned him out with the herd, and they did a lot of running for the first little bit, which was great for him because, you know, he needed to lose some weight. But him and Joey would get into it. And I think, you know, that was a good thing because Joey kept him in line. So that was a really interesting thing. His first time really on pasture in Tennessee. But in the meantime, in Tennessee, starting a business and thinking that I saw some really bad things in terms of hoof separations and distortions and whatever. Well, when I got to Tennessee, oh my, absolute separations, you know, 2 inches wide and 4 inches deep. It was just absolutely amazing. And so what was that?
Right.
You know, well, a lot of people around here did what their grandparents did and fed the way their grandparents did and turned their horses out the way their grandparents did. So that was a whole new way to buck the system here because, you know, we're the Floridians that moved in and we're not doing the things the way that other people do things. We were really ostracized there for a while.
Yep.
But there were Timothy pellets. There would beet pulp for the older horses. I remember soaking a lot of beet pulp because they didn't have the molasses-free beet pulp at the time. And your good vitamin mineral supplement that we got.
Did Dick survive the move?
So Dick's did survive the move. He survived the introduction to the herd, and he actually flourished. That was the first time in his life really being around other horses, and we've kept it like that since. So he's always been in a little herd, but what we discovered in Tennessee was the grass here. And so that had an effect. It took about a year. And that was nice because it took us some time to get a house and get established a little bit. But it took about a year before we started seeing the result of the fescue 31 that is prevalent in the Tennessee area. And in a lot of this area, Virginia, Kentucky, and actually goes all the way out to, what was that, Iowa?
It was specifically planted over there. So it's like starting in Iowa and then moving out as it can. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Whereas here, I believe it was Kentucky, I'm pretty sure, where it was first planted. And now it's moving, you know, south and north. And
so that grass is not only very high in sugar because it is cattle grass. And this was a cattle farm. So there's lots of fescue 31 here. But then it also has, the reason people use it is that it was genetically modified so that it is a very, very hardy grass. It's drought resistant, insect resistant, trample resistant. Really nothing will kill it. And so that was a big problem in terms of management and how to manage the horses.
And that's because Kentucky 31 tall fescue is infected with an endophyte, and that endophyte in recent years, they have realized is an endocrine disruptor. And so regardless of even sugar content, that endophyte makes the horse's endocrine system not work right. And it essentially causes EMS or equine metabolic syndrome. It makes the horses less sensitive to insulin. The grass, the endophyte in the grass does, removing the sugar component entirely. You add that now to a grass that is meant to fatten beef cattle, because this was and still is a beef cattle area. That was our main agricultural industry other than tobacco. It's high in sugar. It's a very rich grass because we want to fatten those cattle quickly, so we can make money off of them. And so we've got a grass that by nature, well, not by nature, by GMO, makes the horses sensitive to sugar. And then it's also very high in sugar. It's the perfect storm for a lot of trouble. They've been studying that more recently. They knew it's been bad for brood mares for a long time because it originated in Kentucky, and not too long after it propagated and became one of the main pasture grasses, they started having issues breeding the racehorse moms. They'd lose babies, they'd have red bag delivery, the mares wouldn't have milk. There was a lot of trouble in the breeding, which was a really big deal because those are expensive babies, and you don't want to be losing them.
Well, and that was the first question the vet had for me. I remember the very first time he came out, once we moved here, he said, "You're not planning to breed, are you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, good, because pregnant mares don't do well on the fescue grass." And that information went in and that information went out because I was not breeding. So why would I even think of it?
Right.
And
it's only been in roughly the last decade that they've even started doing any research studies on using a control group only in the last decade on non-pregnant mares and geldings.
Right.
And so this information is really very new, but that is why you showed up here and these horses had separations like you'd never seen before.
That's right.
Yep.
So it really was an eye-opener. So not only are you trying to trim horses, convince people in Tennessee where, I mean, they will shoe a horse and leave shoes on for 6 or 8 months. I mean, the same pair of shoes. The sign of a good farrier is how long those shoes stay on. And so I move here and want to take shoes off and say, your horse can be just as sound without shoes as with them. But that wasn't happening because the grass, people turn their horses out during the day. They bring them in at night. If they bring them in.
Yeah.
So many people just let the horse out 24/7, which can be very good. And horses should be out and moving around. But on this pasture, it's not the thing to do.
Yeah.
And they let the pastures grow and they're eating the seed heads, and those seed heads are even more toxic. So it's a really, really bad combination. And so why do the horses here have the shoes? Well, I bet you a lot of them are sore without the shoes.
Yep.
Because they all have an inflammation, a type of laminitis that will not allow for, especially the hard ground here. When it's dry, this ground is like concrete. It absolutely is some of the hardest ground.
Yep.
And then the places to ride all have big gravel. So it's a testament to be able to get a horse sound on this kind of ground in those kind of conditions,
Yep.
A barefoot horse.
Yep.
And we're working really hard at it, and we've got some really good success.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to how the hoof is the check engine light of the horse.
Yes.
Right? That hoof here is screaming, telling you, and you just shut it up.
Right.
And then you wonder why suddenly they founder in the springtime, or you find them mysteriously dead of colic because they probably actually had renal failure, or there's such an incidence of blindness, because we think about EMS affecting the feet and causing laminitis, but it, just like diabetes, it affects all the small blood vessels. And so the hooves scream loudest and they scream first because they're under the most stress. They're holding the horse up, right? The horse is on them all the time. So they're the first one to start yelling, but it's also affecting other systems in your horse. And so if the feet don't get them, something else will. if the hoof isn't listened to. But from the very beginning, the hoof is trying to say, hey, something's not right. But we are not, as a horse-owning society, it is not common practice to be sensitive to that. It's more of a common practice to be irritated by it. Oh, my horse is sore. Oh, my horse has an abscess. Let's do the thing that's going to shut that up, and we can just ride on. It's not common knowledge. It's not socially acceptable even yet, I don't think, to go, oh man, it's telling me something and I should listen to it because it's going to save me and my horse trouble down the road and maybe even save the horse's life.
Right. Well, we're just such an instant gratification society now. Yep. Everything's at our fingertips. You want to do something, you want to do it now. And even when you suggest hoof boots to people, oh, well, I have to get them on. It's just too much trouble. And what a shame. Around here, an 18-year-old horse is old. And I have a 31-year-old horse up in the old folks group, 31-year-old, 28-year-old, and the other two are 25 or so.
This one right here is at least 25. Buzzy over there, who you can't see today, is nobody knows. The stories say that he was here before the earth. That he's that old.
And so you think about the horse, I think about it as an investment, right? You had to buy the horse. You put training into the horse. You have a relationship that you've developed with the horse. And by the time they're 18, they're just broke, in my opinion. From 18 to 35 is when you're having fun. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's just a shame how we think about what we think about. So up until 2011, we basically had our horses out 24/7. So we moved here in 2006. For a year, we didn't have problems because it took a while for the fescue to really take hold. So that's 2007-ish. And so for 3 years, right? 4
years, something like that.
Yeah, it was, it was a discouraging time because you had to use boots. You had to use hoof boots because the horses just were not sound. Then a blessing came in 2011 and we were hit with a tornado. Actually, 2 tornadoes came through the property. And in the rebuild, because we had been looking at this to keep the horses off the grass during the day. And at the time, we probably had 25 horses here. I did not want a big barn. I did not want them kept in stalls. I knew in Florida, I didn't like the stalls, and that's why we had runs attached to the stalls to give them more space to move. But what I had been seeing was dry lot situation. So you have a shed, you have an area that will keep no grass depending on the amount of horses you have in it. So if you had a dry lot for one horse, it would be a smaller area. If you have a dry lot for several horses, it could be a little bit bigger. And they would keep any little sprig of grass that was growing down to nothing. And I had researched the grass situation during this time. And there is a lady named Katie Watts from safergrass.org. Excellent website. And she talked about the best times for grazing when the sugar was the lowest. Again, like the minerals and sitting on the floor and not feeding my family because I'm mineral balancing. The best times to have your horses out were 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning until 10 a.m. Well, that wasn't happening because that was just too intensive. But as far into dark as we felt comfortable to turn them out and then bring them in the morning has been a phenomenal solution to us. Had made a huge change in all the horses to the point that they can be ridden soundly on very, very hard ground. We don't really use hoof boots except if we have rehab cases come in.
The last time I probably booted one of my own riding horses was 2016 with Beauty. I haven't booted since then. And I mean, walk, trot, canter, sound on the rocks. It was so cool.
Well, and it's such an interesting thing that, yes, we did the dry lot, but it has taken years, especially for the core group of horses that we own, to see that the healthier they get, the healthier they get.
Yes.
And so the easier it is to manage. I remember being so strict for several years And then it would come to the point where, well, we had a dinner at 5 that we were doing. And so how do you manage the horse? And there were times where we turned them out a little early and nobody died. and you didn't see the repercussions because of the fact that the stronger they got, a little something here or there, not as a daily thing,
Right.
but as that special, somebody's birthday or something came up that they had to go out earlier or they wouldn't get out at all. We saw that there were less and less repercussions from that.
It's just like us. If we need to lose a considerable amount of weight because maybe our blood sugar is a little reactive.
Right.
In the beginning, when you start that journey, you can't have the Snickers bar. And you really
Right.
probably shouldn't have the slice of cake.
Right.
Because there is going to be a repercussion from it.
Right.
But once you get down to that goal weight, once that blood sugar has been stable, once your body is processing things better and you stay there for a while, well, then you can have the slice of cake and you can have the Snickers bar now and then. And you're fine.
Right.
Because
right.
you've given your system time to heal and find balance.
Right.
Now, if you went back to that every day and in excess,
Right.
you may go back to having trouble. Because once you do have trouble, I think it's so much easier to fall back into trouble.
Right.
Right? Because it's kind of like the levee has broken.
Sure.
But manage them long enough and you patch the levee pretty successfully. And I think that's
right.
so cool.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And during that time is when we found Equine Science and Dawn at Equine Science, who had some amazing herbal blends. And so one of the ones that my lip is on with Cushing's has been on since probably 2000. I don't know. I have no idea. How long do I know Don? Forever.
Yeah, 2018 maybe we decided,
probably.
I think it's time to start him on the Cushing's blend.
Right. He's doing phenomenal. He does not have a big, thick, curly coat. He does not have the inflammation in his hooves anymore. And I look at it like this. There is pharmaceutical medications for Cushing's.
Right.
But because horses are herbivores and there are products out there that help keep the symptoms at bay, let's try it. And if it does nothing for you, okay, I have the pharmaceutical. But let's say it actually did do something for you and it did something for you for several years, right? And then maybe you have the symptoms. Well, now you can go to the medication. Because what I see is that when people start the medication, they sometimes have to increase.
Right. Body becomes resistant.
Right. And then they don't have anything. And so I'm not against medications. Don't get me wrong. But if we can do something to help in the meantime, to help with the symptoms. And again, he's 31 years old and is doing fantastic.
Yes. So with that said, real quick. Okay, so Dix came to Tennessee. He survived it. He started sweating. Things were kind of going pretty good. I know because I've been a part of it. You hadn't been able to get back to your dressage career because you've had other things going on. But were you able to go back to riding, Dix?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's where maybe when we delve more into, as hoof trimmers, we always tell people, I can trim you the perfect hoof. But if the nutrition isn't right, and the tension level in your horse isn't right. If the training isn't right, if your horse is carrying a bunch of angst, he's not going to have the stride that he would have if he was a relaxed, willing participant. Right. And so that's where our name really came from, Primarily Hooves, because of all of the other things. And we'll get into more of them,
the hooves.
but so much more. And so if I've got a client who says, his hooves really aren't improving, and I say, well, I can trim this great, but if you're riding him in tension and miscommunication, he's never going to be, and these hooves are never going to be what they could if we don't fix that. So yes, we went back to riding. I got some phenomenal help with Dix to be able to ride, but physically, yes, he was absolutely ready. He was easier because he felt better, but he got a whole lot feeling better once Mr. Whitney helped me.
And so how is he now? He's 31. Is he still sound?
Yes, he is very sound. He's actually probably going to do a little work for us the next coming weekend. And Yeah, last year, Danielle and we don't have a lot of time to ride. It's terrible, and we would like some more time to ride. But we have some young horses and haven't had a lot of cantering experience in the last several years just
Right.
because of things. And Dick's has about one of the nicest canters that you would ever want to see. And I've had some accidents, car accident, foot amputation accident, or toe amputation.
That can be a story one day.
That's another story. But anyway, and so I've been very careful with my body, and the riding just hasn't been there. So my older horses have really retired because there's just so many more, and we got young horses that we really want to put good starts on. But, you're not cantering around a young horse immediately. And when you go to canter them and you say, gosh, I haven't cantered in a really long time. We pulled Dick's out last year and got him a little fit and started doing canter work with Dick's because he has such a nice canter. We need to do more of that.
Yes.
But no, he's sound and happy and agreeable.
And that's the thing, from not wanting to move forward and getting plumb violent over it to now he was giving us canter lessons and looked forward to it because the next day you'd go out and he'd come up like, are we doing something?
That really sparked a light in him, which is so nice.
Yes.
And I hate saying, not today, buddy. I'm sorry.
And he can almost be a problem because you go out and you're doing chores and he's right there, scratch my belly. I mean, he's so much more sociable. I remember, and Harry is not wrong, but I remember Harry talking about how, the more Iberian type horses, they're war horses.
Right.
They're not warm, fuzzy horses. They are more aloof. It is in their nature.
Right.
And yes, more so than maybe something else. But he has just blossomed into just such a lovable, but he just feels so good.
That's
He's just so happy in himself.
That's right.
And what a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really, really is. And on that note, he has a birthday coming up in July. He will be 31. And it was funny, when he was born just a few months before Danielle was. And I remember when I drove him home from Michigan, I was very pregnant with Danielle, like 3 days away from giving birth. And so he came to live in Florida, and I had Danielle. And, the months following, people would say, how's the baby? And I would say, which one? So that was really, really cute. But that might help us get into episode 3 with the Danielle story and how she decided to follow in her mother's footsteps and surpass her mother significantly because of her smarts and her desire to want to help horses.
That will be a lot of fun. But yes, we're going to have to save that for tomorrow because we are at an hour and we are all out of time for today. So this was absolutely awesome to get to learn the origin of why the nutritional aspect of it came into it.
Right.
And just the horse who made that happen. It wasn't an option. He made that happen.
He made that happen.
And how wonderful is it that now today he's just a normal guy living his best life, as happy as can be. And so that's a big takeaway. I want a takeaway to be how important the nutrition is for your horse's hooves, but for your horse's health. But I also want a takeaway to be, if you're in the middle of trying to figure it out, if right now things are hard and scary and stressful and you're not sure where your horse's future is going to be, because I remember being a kid in Florida, and between the stress you felt over him and how sickly he looked, and again, sickly in an obesity kind of way, not sweating, being in his air-conditioned stall, I remember being a kid thinking, he's not going to live very long.
Right.
And I didn't know anything at that point, but it was just...
Right. As a kid, it's an observation. Sure.
Right. And
like, why is everybody else out and doing stuff and this horse is stuck in a stall or stuck with a bucket on him or just living in sand?
Yes. Yes. And you're worried about,
and blowing up and,
Yes. You worried about losing him. And so now getting to go I think I said he was 31 earlier, but he's turning 31 in July. And he's essentially a brother because we've grown up together. And getting to continue to grow up together after I surpassed my 30th birthday, and here we are. We're still essentially growing up together.
That's right. Really kind of cool.
It is absolutely amazing. And so if you're in that scary time,
Right.
I hope this can help be an inspiration for keep on pushing, keep on fighting, keep on learning. It can get better. And you might be looking 20 years into the future and you've got a happy oldie out there just living his best life. And I know that can happen, but you can't give up. That's the big one. You can't give up.
That's right. We've all been to really scary things. You know, we might be up here. Well, all we're doing is telling you what we've been through and maybe how to avoid it or how to think more for yourself or, you know, find resources to help because there's information out there now, which is really nice.
Yes. And a horse like Dick's and everything he had to go through has helped countless other horses not have to take that path. And what a gift that is that he's given us and given other horses. You know, everybody starts somewhere and sometimes it has to be a little scary at first so then you can go on and do better for everybody else. And that's another, I guess the third takeaway is whatever it is we go through, I think what's most important is making sure nobody else has to go through it again. And so that's a big part of this podcast. What we want to grow it into is helping you avoid those kind of things.
That's right.
All right. I'm sure we're well over an hour now. I want to thank everybody who's watched episode 1 and now watched episode 2 or listened to it. The podcast itself should be available on most of the major platforms, Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon. I don't know if I figured out how to get it onto Pandora at this point, but I don't know. Maybe I have. If there's any platform you'd like it on that it's not on your favorite listening platform, be sure to leave a comment. Let me know. And I'm happy to get it onto there because I know not everybody has the time to watch a video. Don't forget to come and follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And we post hoof trimming videos, and we're starting to slide into some more educational stuff. On the Facebook, I do a lot of educational posts, whether it's about hoof care or it's about mentality you need to have going into these things, or if it's something I just want you to be thinking about. We do a lot more education over on Facebook. And we also run a Patreon. And the Patreon has much more in-depth educational articles, as well as I'm working towards being able to upload case studies. There's a whole library of resources, posts, pages, groups, websites that you need to know that would benefit you, curated by Lauren on there. For as little as $5 a month, you can help support this, help support us, help support this kind of library of educational resources we're trying to build for you guys to have access to on the internet. We both want to extend a super big, heartfelt thank you to our current Patreon members. You guys don't know how much you mean to me, and especially so because your support helps do this. But especially in the beginning, when I was stepping out of my comfort zone and starting to post online and trying to put it out there for everybody, and social media is brilliant, but at the same time in the beginning, it's a very kind of vacant place because nobody knows who you are and they don't care. And so for those first couple Patreon members to subscribe and comment on my articles and just be like, we believe in you. That was so, I can't thank you guys enough for that. That is so motivating and really helped me on the hard days where I'm like, maybe I should just give up and just go back to trimming hooves and not saying anything. It helped give me the push I needed to keep on moving forward. And now we have a podcast. So that's pretty stinking cool.
That is cool.
For as little as $5 a month, you get access to all the educational articles, and it just is a great way to help make sure we can keep on doing this. So thank you guys so much, and we will see you in episode 3. Bye.
Bye.